Hey. Hello everybody. Right, so we've got part 2 coming up now. So everybody make sure you got your drinks with you. And your snackage, as they say on Buckeye Bigfoot. I'm in a Bigfoot at the moment. But that's something else. Back to Mark Devlin. Here we go, part 2.
Right, let's see whose nostalgic attachment to their own particular favourite music act I'm going to piss all over now, shall we? Oh, that's my karma, you see, the slides aren't working now. Oh, it's Prince. Oh yeah. I know. I was actually a fan of Prince's music, so this one is very difficult for me. And to be fair, this isn't necessarily a presentation laying into Prince in the same way that I do certain other acts. As we'll see as we go on, this again is an abridged version of a presentation that I delivered in May in Newcastle, Occult Aspects of Prince. So this retains most of the interesting stuff. Just to set the scene and put it into context then, there were 3 artists who could be said to have been the most popular and the most prolific in the 1980s coming out of the United States. So that would have been Prince, Madonna and Michael Jackson. Interestingly, they were all born in the summer of 1958 and they all came out of the Midwest region of the US. So Michael Jackson died, so we're told, on the 25th of June 2009, coming out of Gary, Indiana. And then Madonna, we have been born in Bay City, Michigan on the 16th of August, 1958. And 16th of August, it turns out, is quite an unlucky date for musicians, because that was the date on which Robert Johnson, the blues musician, died back in 1938 at the age of 27. It was also the date on which Elvis Presley died, so we're told, in 1977. And more recently, Aretha Franklin in 2017. So you've got the king of blues, the king of rock and roll, and the queen of soul all dying on the same day. And it just happens to be Madonna's birthday, the queen of pop. But I'm sure it's just a coincidence and there's nothing more to it. And then we have Prince, born in June 1958, coming out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And that's who we're looking at. Prince went by a number of different artistic pseudonyms. So he was known at various points as the artist formerly known as Prince, Camille, Joey Coco, The Kid, Alexander Nevermind, Jamie Starr, Tora Tora, Christopher Tracy, His Royal Badness. And he used some of these pseudonyms to write songs for other artists, such as Alexander Nevermind for Manic Monday, which he wrote for the Bangles. Prince also wrote I Feel For You, which was a big hit for Chaka Khan, and before that it was a song for the Pointer Sisters. And he also wrote Nothing Compares To You, made famous by Sinead O'Connor. But the first thing I think of when I hear about pseudonyms and alter egos is mind control programming, trauma-based mind control. This, unfortunately, is a feature of the music industry and of every other aspect of entertainment. We find it in the Hollywood film industry, we find it in television, and in music. There is so much evidence to show that many of your favourite household name artists will have been subjected to trauma-based mind control programming. This often occurs from early childhood. It often occurs as a result, again, of the families into which these artists are born. And they're subjected to horrific trauma from an early age, which causes the mind to dissociate from reality as its only way of dealing with the horror of what's happening to it. And so the mind shatters into these different compartments or alters, and it's been discovered that these can be programmed with their own personalities, and they can be brought forward or tucked back into the recesses of the human mind at the will of a programmer or a handler if they have the appropriate trigger phrase. Or in some cases it can be a design or a colour, a piece of music, something that brings forward these different alters. So that's what I think about when I hear about these different alter egos coming from Prince. And there are many aspects of his personality which would also suggest that he was subject to mind control. In Musical Truth Volume 2, as the main appendix section, I featured an awesome piece of work from a guy named Dan Munro, who I first met when he worked on the Planet X radio show in Liverpool many years ago. I went in on the show, got chatting to Dan. Turns out he was a big fan of Prince. He's since moved out to Australia, but he put together this incredible essay going through Prince's entire canon of work, or at least his early albums, and examining many of the themes that become prevalent through his music. And he picked up on many things that I'd missed through having been a fan of Prince. Mainly that he was a walking contradiction. And he seemed to embody so many different dialectics, so many different opposing aspects of his personality. So he was best known for his lewd and lascivious material, which was very sexually explicit. His best known songs fall into that category. But Dan pointed out that every time you find a track of this nature on one of his albums, you find another one which is deeply reflective or spiritual or religious in nature, which seems to counterbalance it. And it's almost as if he's embracing sexual sin and then immediately seeking emancipation or forgiveness or deliverance from it by embracing spiritual values and espousing higher-minded spiritual teachings. We find this throughout his work. And there are different themes that he seems to be obsessed with as well. In his early output, he was always talking about some kind of apocalypse in terms of that word representing some sort of calamity or disaster befalling humanity. And then the emergence of a golden dawn or a new dawn arising in the aftermath of this. He seemed to have had an obsession with the notion of nuclear war back in the early 80s, when that was very much a thing. There was a lot of paranoia in that late Cold War era about Russia having the bomb. Russia was the enemy back then, just like they are back now. There's nothing new under the sun. All these things seem to cycle back round again. But these are themes that we always found in Prince's work. And Dan drew attention to this, and we'll have a look at some different aspects of that as we go through. There was a period where Prince asked to be known simply by this unpronounceable hermaphroditic symbol. This became his official artist name. And this was a blurring of masculine and feminine values and archetypes. And this was very representative of what Prince did. He would take two opposing values and just kind of amalgamate them. And just thinking about the way he presented himself as an artist, on track he would often have a very high-pitched voice which made him sound very feminine. But he could also drop his voice several tones so that it became very bass-heavy and very masculine in nature. And he seemed to embody these two different elements. So according to this excerpt from the Vigilant Citizen website, he talks of the love symbol on the cover of Prince's 1993 album. Although Prince never fully explained the meaning of this symbol, other than it came to him during meditation, one can easily discern an amalgamation of the male and female symbols crossed by a trumpet-like instrument. It might be a visual representation of his androgynous musical persona. And then from the Illuminati Watcher website, another great resource, the proprietor, Isaac Weishaupt, not his real name, says, there could be more behind the LGBT movement than just equal rights if you consider the beliefs of the secret history of the occult. They believe that humans were originally androgynous beings and someday will return to this perfected state. We know there is an attempt at destroying the male-female paradigm in order to usher in the digital matrix hell through transhumanism. So maybe this was one form of early predictive programming sent to us from Warner Brothers under the guise of a staged rebellion from this famous musician. Interesting way of looking at it. And then the blurring of the genders is also presented to us in the figure of Baphomet, designed by the French Freemason and occultist Eliphas Levi, and beloved of so many dark occult secret societies, notably several of those helmed by Aleister Crowley. So we've got these different dynamics at play here. You've got a representation of the feminine magnetic energy of the moon, juxtaposed with that of the masculine electrical energy of the sun. And you've got night and day, male and female, good and evil, these different ideas, these different themes being conveyed through the same entity. And that seems to have been embodied by Prince. So here he is on his album titled Dirty Mind, and many of the tracks on this, as the title suggests, are lewd and lascivious and sexually explicit in nature, but you still have some of these other songs with more opposing values, even on that album. By the time we get to the year 1982, Prince has put out his album 1999. And on the sleeve here, we've got some occult symbols being conveyed, an all-seeing eye, and various other ideas as well. This was the first album where Prince had got together with his backing group, The Revolution, and they got a credit for the first time, Prince and The Revolution. So if we apply some satanic inversion of the type that these occultists like to do to this sleeve, then turning it upside down, the 1999 becomes a 666. Why would it not? And interestingly, in the title track to this album, Prince appears to be foreshadowing what would come to be known as the Millennium Bug. Anyone remember that? As 1999 gave way to 2000, there was all this hysteria and this fear in society that had been deliberately placed there, with the idea that computer systems and anything running on a digital control system would have difficulty dealing with that date switchover, where the 99 values in those two fields would click over to 00, a negative empty value in those fields, as the year 2000 dawned. And we were getting all kinds of horror stories about planes that would be falling from the sky and electronic equipment that would be blowing up. But the general public was getting used to these ideas in 1999 as 2000 loomed, whereas Prince had put this into his song back in 1982, where he's got the lyric 2000, oops, party over, out of time. So he seemed to have been clued in on the fact that this would be a big social engineering agenda 17 years into the future. Prince got the memo a long time before the rest of us did. And it's not the only example we have of him seemingly being clued in on such affairs. So also on this album, we got this phrase being used for the first time in the sleeve notes: may you live to see the dawn. Again, Prince's infatuation is what I'm trying to say. Freudian slip there. With the idea of this dawn, the dawning of a new era, a new age, or possibly an allusion to Aleister Crowley's Order of the Golden Dawn, which he was a part of for some time. His best known album, arguably, would have been 1984's Purple Rain. This was also a movie of the same name, which was very autobiographical. It pretty much told the story of Prince and where he came from. A lot of allusions to mind control in that movie, particularly at the hands of his overbearing, abusive father. This again seems to be a common factor between Prince, Michael Jackson and Madonna, because all of them have spoken of having abusive fathers, and this could have been part of their programming, their conditioning. So Purple Rain was also a single, and there's many interpretations put on the occult meaning of Purple Rain. One refers to the crown chakra, purple being the colour that's associated with that, and that whole process of the pineal gland being illuminated through the process of internal alchemy, the raising of the chrism oil, as it's known, and the raising of kundalini energy, resulting in the illumination of the pineal gland, or purple rain, to use that symbolism for it. Another interesting thing about the album Purple Rain is that it contains an example of backmasking. So this is the use of subliminal messages placed into audio recordings that can only be properly discerned when they're played in reverse. So many musicians have employed this method through the decades. The Beatles spoke about it, and they said in quite a few interviews that they were using backmasking all the time. A great example of it is in the run-out groove to Strawberry Fields Forever, where we get a message which sounds similar to I Buried Paul. And according to many who adhere to the Paul is dead conspiracy theory, the idea that the real Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced, I can tell you there's certainly been more than one Paul McCartney, there's certainly been at least two of them out there. Whether that means anyone died in 1966 or at any other time can't be proven, but there is this long-lasting conspiracy theory known as Paul is dead, and that clue in Strawberry Fields Forever is supposed to be one of many pertaining to the idea that Paul is indeed dead. The cover story for it, according to John Lennon, is that he was saying, not I buried Paul, but cranberry sauce, or I'm very bored. And then another famous subliminal message in an audio recording comes to us from Led Zeppelin in their song Stairway to Heaven, which is supposed to contain all kinds of satanic messages when played in reverse. But the one we get from Prince here is from a highly controversial track from his Purple Rain album. The track was called Darling Nikki, and it led directly to the introduction of the parental advisory stickers that we saw on albums beginning in the 1980s. This whole campaign was masterminded by Tipper Gore, the wife of the American former politician and serial career liar Al Gore, who apparently walked in on their 11-year-old daughter and caught her listening to Darling Nikki, this extremely sexually explicit track from Purple Rain. So that's one of its claims to fame. But then, at the end of this track, on the run-out groove on the album, for anyone that remembers vinyl records, got plenty of those here tonight, I come from the vinyl era myself, if you used to leave the needle running, rather than picking it up at the end of a song on one of the sides of an album, it would often go into a run-out groove, and there would often be a message concealed within there if you left it playing for long enough. So we get one of these at the end of Darling Nikki on the Purple Rain album, and it's clearly been recorded in reverse, but you're listening to it flipped back round the right way. Very cleverly done. Got an example of it here if it plays. Not sure if we have sound here. So we hear Prince's voice saying, it's got loud again, isn't it? Which one is that? Set them all at halfway and I can't go wrong. We hear Prince's voice saying, hello, how are you? I'm fine because I know that the Lord is coming soon, coming soon, coming soon. And this occurs just after we've heard the sound of wind and rain, as if there's some sort of catastrophe or disaster. And this is the emergence from it. So it's that familiar theme again of some sort of disaster, and then the emergence of this golden dawn, this new era coming off the back of it. And it illustrates that there was a religious, spiritual side to Prince. So this is why I suspect him to have been programmed multiple, a mind control altar, because he'll be talking about sexual explicitness in one breath, and then talking about deliverance and I know that the Lord is coming soon in the next breath, or in the next song. And then on the next album, to Purple Rain, Around the World in a Day, in 1985, we have an incredible track titled The Ladder. And again, this seems to be referring to this idea of the raising of the chrism oil, the raising of kundalini energy, and the accessing of higher levels of consciousness through the pineal gland. So in the lyrics he says, everybody's looking for the ladder. Everybody wants salvation of the soul. The steps you take are no easy road, but the reward is great for those who want to know. So he sounds like somebody who knows what he's talking about in putting together lyrics like that. But then, it's never easy to gain a proper handle on Prince and his true nature and his motives. He's a deeply complex artist, because we come to the Black Album, which was almost released in 1987. So after Sign of the Times, which came out in early 1987, it's lauded by critics often as Prince's greatest work. I would claim that it's not. Purple Rain is a far more superior album. But Sign of the Times was a much loved album. And Prince followed it up 6 months later with the Black Album, which was all set to be released. And then at the last minute, he requested that it be withdrawn. So it never got distributed at the time. Warner Brothers, his label, put it out some 7 years later. So it eventually saw the light of day in 1994. But in 1987, it was withdrawn and only bootleg illegal copies existed at the time. But looking into some of the content of that album, we find some extremely intriguing lyrics. There's a track on there called Cindy C, which is a reference to Cindy Crawford, who was a supermodel very big in the 1980s. She would appear to have been mind-controlled in just the same way that so many other supermodels are, and any celebrity, any famous person who reaches a certain level seems to be subject to it as well. That's the way they're selected. So in this track, Cindy C, he says, Cindy C, play with me, I will pay the usual fee. So there's hints at prostitution going on there, sex trafficking. I will give you 7 sips of elderberry wine. Maybe we'll unlock the secrets of your mind. So he appears to be demonstrating a familiarity with the idea of trauma-based mind control and the alters, the different personalities that we get as part of that process. But we also have this reference to taking 7 sips of elderberry wine. And I don't know if anyone's mind is going to the same places that mine did when I first heard that reference, but adrenochrome, anyone? Yeah. And then another track from the album has this lyric. If your body needs water, keep on dancing because you oughta. Keep the blood flowing down to your feet. Brother Morris will be round in a minute with a bucket filled in it, squirrel meat. The blood real good if you drink it real fast. But the aftertaste just lasts and lasts. And what do we hear about the consumption of adrenochrome? Apparently it leads to a rejuvenation of the body, and it lasts and lasts, and it's highly addictive, so we're told. So could this have been a knowing, subtle reference to the whole adrenochrome industry in a track by Prince? And could this in some way have led to his hesitation to see this album being released at the time it was originally put out? By 1988, the following year, we had the album Love Sexy, and we appear to have Prince embracing these 2 different sides to his personality once again. Love Sexy and Spooky Electric. These were his alters, his personas, and this was the title of Dan Munro's essay. So a lyric from that album goes, I know there is a heaven, I know there is a hell. Listen to me, people, I've got a story to tell. I know there was confusion, lightning all around me. That's when I called his name. Don't you know he found me? No is what Spooky Electric say. It's not okay. But I know love is the only way till my dying day. No, till my dying day I'll be okay, because Love Sexy is the one till my day is done. Again, higher-minded, spiritual knowledge being conveyed there. And so from the confusing and complex and difficult to comprehend different aspects of Prince, we come on to his reported death, which occurred, so we're told, in 2016. 2016 was a very unlucky year for music makers. So at the start of the year, we're told, David Bowie passed away at the age of 69. There's more to know on that one, I'll tell you. And then at the end of the year, on Christmas Day, George Michael turned up dead in bed at the age of 53, like we do. And so somewhere between those two, we had the reported death of Prince on the 21st of April. This is where it's said to have happened, at his Paisley Park complex. This served as his corporate HQ for his production company, recording company. It housed recording studios, and it had living quarters. We see a pyramid with an illuminated capstone on the doorway to the building, and this is said to have glowed purple whenever Prince was present. Nice touch. So purple was a colour which was long associated with Prince. We've got this idea of the purple rain, the colour of the crown chakra, and purple is also a colour connected to royalty. We'll come across that. Outside the building here, we've got that symbol which he came to be known by, adorning the outside of Paisley Park. So when news of his death broke, we had this intriguing comment made by L.A. Reid, who was a record industry executive and a close personal friend of Prince, where he was drawing on Prince's reference to an elevator in his song Let's Go Crazy from his Purple Rain album. And he says, Prince thought elevators were the devil and finds his friend's death haunting. So going back to the lyric that he was referring to from Let's Go Crazy, it's given us, are we going to let the elevator bring us down? Oh no, let's go crazy. But I think what Prince was actually referring to in that song, if you listen to it, was not the elevator, but it was the elevator. And there are spiritual connotations here. So a de-elevator is something that brings you down to earth. Are we going to let the elevator bring us down rather than bringing you up? So the spiritual analogy here is that rising to accelerated levels of consciousness is elevation, whereas de-elevation is being brought down into base consciousness and this apparent physical 3D reality. So I think Prince was demonstrating knowledge of this dynamic in this song, and that's why L.A. Reid would have commented that he associated elevators with the devil. So how poetic then that Prince should have been discovered dead in an elevator, of all things, in Paisley Park at the age of 57. We're told that Prince took an overdose of fentanyl from those nice people in Big Pharma. And here in this song, in this paragraph at the bottom, we've got, Doctor, everything will be all right. We'll make everything go wrong. Pills and thrills and daffodils will kill. Hang tough, children. So Prince dies of a product coming out of doctors, pills and thrills, in an elevator. Go figure. So going back to the reported date of death of Prince, 21st of April 2016, it just happened to be the 90th birthday of this. I'm sure we were all celebrating the Jubilee, last month. I'm sure we all had our flags and bunting out. The bunting will be out in my house on a different kind of occasion, but that's by the by. But back in 2016, it was all about the 90th birthday of the Queen of Germany. Sorry, England. Same thing. And to mark the occasion, various monuments around the world had been drenched in the colour purple, such as the Niagara Falls on the US-Canada border. And this was said to be in tribute to her travesty, because purple is a colour associated with royalty, But it was also highly associated with Prince. And when it comes to Niagara Falls, we have an insane amount of synchro-mysticism going on here. So one of the key monuments to have received a purple drenching was the Niagara Falls, and it was here that the singer Denise Matthews, better known by her stage name of Vanity, was born in 1959. Vanity went on to become a protege and reportedly a love interest of Prince, and her public image was closely associated with it. Vanity died 2 months before Prince at the age of 57, reportedly of a liver failure resulting from years of drug abuse. The plot thickens when you learn that Vanity's date of death was exactly the same as that of Prince's mother 14 years earlier, 15th of February, and that Prince's father died on the exact same day as Aaliyah, the R&B singer, on the 25th of August 2001. So they both died 17 days before the events of 9/11. 17 Days was the title of the song which appeared as the B-side to Prince's When Doves Cry. Do you ever get the impression that this kind of stuff cannot actually be happening at the hands of human planning? That there have to be other forces outside of that that are causing all these events to synchronistically come together. It certainly seems to be that way to me. And it goes further when you factor in another of the songs from Prince's Purple Rain album, which was titled I Would Die For You, released at the end of 1984. Prince was very fond of substituting numbers for letters and for turning words into letters as well. So for the word for, F-O-R, he would use the numerical symbol 4, and then for the word you, he would just use the letter U. So if we ascribe numerical values to what we have here, U is the 21st letter of the alphabet. So I would die for you becomes I would die for 21, as in April the 21st, the exact date on which we were told Prince died in 2016. This song, although it was released in 1984, we know from recording notes, was recorded in Minneapolis in 1983. So that was 33 years before we're told Prince turned up dead on the 21st of April in 2016. 33 as in a number beloved of Freemasonry. These connections just go on forever. In terms of whether there was a motive for Prince to have been taken out by the industry that spawned him, is there anything to suggest that he may have warranted being taken out in the minds of those that control the industry? Well, Prince got into some very high-profile legal battles with Warner Brothers, his record label, in exactly the same way as Michael Jackson did with the Sony Corporation, to which he was signed, and George Michael did as well, incidentally. Didn't end well for any of them, really, did it? Prince was trying to free himself from the restrictive nature of the contract that he held with Warner Brothers. And he spoke on a few occasions about how record labels treat their artists. We've got a small piece of footage here from the early 90s where he's talking about this very dynamic.
The reason why it became such a big deal then is ever since my third album, I wasn't really taking large advances from the recording companies. I was recording the albums myself in my own studio. So the way I looked at it, I owned the work because I paid for it. And I did own the work. I created it, so I felt like it should belong to me. That said, the companies felt otherwise. And they would always hold this contract up and say, well, you signed it. And I'd say, well, I understand. It's not like I want to leave. I just want to, talk about this thing and see if we can't make it more fair. Of course, they wouldn't change, because if they changed, they wouldn't really exist. And that's kind of the situation we're in right today. They're not going to exist much longer. It's not like we're against them or anything like that. The idea is that we find better ways of working with one another. It shouldn't be a situation where they own the album or the work. We're talking about intellectual copyright. If they're going to be indeed a delivery service, then that's fine. But even FedEx doesn't say that they own the thing that they ship, right? Because ultimately it keeps us apart, and it keeps the people in power in charge of us. So ultimately we're going to have to learn how to be together and become one people. What I've been doing recently is studying the scriptures as deep as I can, so that that's what gives me the optimism. And I would advise anybody, if you want to feel like there's some hope in this joint, pick up the book and read it. And somebody that actually actually show you what's going on here, because it's a real thing. You don't hear a lot of young people talking about things like I talk about because they really haven't lived. They haven't gone through a lot of experiences yet. And we can't really expect them to. It's just not all a party, you know, alcoholism and promiscuity. Get some elders up in here. Let's talk about all this and distribution service. I mean, what do we really need record companies for? I mean, really.
Not the sort of comments that are really going to ingratiate yourself to your corporate overlords if they're coming from you personally, individually, and they've not been commissioned as some sort of agenda. So the industry doesn't like artists that speak their own mind. It doesn't like artists with a conscience. And it tends to come down quite hard on those who take these steps to make an example of them to other artists to keep them in check. So another comment that Prince made about trying to remove himself from the nature of his contract was, the first step I've taken towards the ultimate goal of emancipation from the chains that bind me to Warner Brothers was to change my name from Prince to the love symbol. Prince is the name that my mother gave me at birth. Warner Brothers took the name, trademarked it, and used it as the main marketing tool to promote all of the music that I wrote. The company owns the name Prince and all related music marketed under Prince. I became merely a pawn used to produce more money for Warner Brothers. Staying with suggestions as to what motives there might have been to get rid of Prince, if we assume that he'd outlived his usefulness to the industry and those that control it. We have to factor in this chat show appearance that he made with Tavis Smiley back in 2009. Does this ring a bell with anyone? Anyone seen this? Not many, okay. Well, we've got a clip from that now. Prince takes the conversation into some unexpected subject areas.
Dick Gregory really moved me and a lot of my friends. I show it to everybody that comes over the house, especially white folks, because they need to hear that, you know, so that they know more about all of us. Because what he said affects all of us. He said something that really hit home about this phenomenon of chemtrails. And, you know, when I was a kid, I used to see these trails in the sky all the time. And so that's cool. A jet just moved. And then you started to see a whole bunch of them. And next thing you know, everybody in your neighborhood was fighting and arguing and you didn't know why. Okay, and you really didn't know why. I mean, everybody was fighting. So he started riffing about the chemtrails. And he started to say things that hit home so hard. And I would recommend that everybody try to get what he said online or wherever and try to get a copy of it and just listen to it. Because I was so moved that I had to write the song. The other thing is the first line of the song says I was born on the same plantation in the United States of the red, white, and blue. And we live in a place now that feels just about like a plantation. We're all indentured servants, you know. When I found out there were 8 presidents before George Washington, I wanted to smack somebody. You know, I wanted to know why I was taught otherwise. Just tell me the whole story. I'll fill in the blanks, but don't tell me something that you think I'm supposed to know.
Not the sort of things you're supposed to bring up on a TV chat show unless it's in the script, right? And Prince said that he learned a lot of that stuff from Dick Gregory, who was a comedian and a political activist. So he goes all the way back to the counterculture era of the 60s. He was on the bill for the Human Being, which was this event in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park in January of 1967, which was a precursor to the Summer of Love. And then Dick Gregory cropped up again in the 1970s, 1975, when he was one of 2 men, the other one being Bob Grodin, to publicly present the Zapruder film of the J.F. Kennedy assassination to the American public for the first time. So even though that event occurred in 1963, nobody had seen that Zapruder footage, of which we're now all so familiar, until 1975. And Dick Gregory was one of the guys that presented that on TV. And he said, you know, the public has a right to see this. And he became something of an activist. And as Prince says there, Dick Gregory spoke of how the history books have been manipulated and were lied to through so-called educational establishments. And he learned about chemtrails from him as well. So after Prince died, Dick Gregory, by this point, very old man, 84, was tracked down. And he was asked what he made of Prince's death. And he said he didn't know Prince, and he didn't associate with him, and he doesn't like celebrities, so he wouldn't be drawn on it. But he did say that Prince was involved in an industry where if you piss off the overlords in the upper echelons of it, they won't necessarily kill you straight away. They might sit on that grudge and kill you 10 years later. So he's saying Prince could have made comments years before that would have been remembered, and they made him a marked man. But they're not dumb enough to take him out straight away. They'll take him out years down the line when everyone's forgotten about what he'd said. Shortly after he made these comments, Dick Gregory turned up dead. I mean, he was 84, and 84-year-olds do die, but he'd gone into hospital to be treated for an infection, and he was entirely expected to come out, but he never did. So we can make of that what we will. And we can make of this what we will as well. Occult signalling coming from Prince. He's doing the very same triangle of manifestation as we saw Stuart Sutcliffe of the Beatles doing in the first part. It's over the sacrum there. It's in exactly the same place. It indicates high-level occult knowledge. He's got his hat tipped over one eye, so that one eye is showing, giving that one-eye symbolism again. So more contradictions, a walking contradiction. You know, was he on our side? Was he trying to warn us? Was he trying to signal to us? Did he have some kind of awakening? Did his conscience kick in? Did the mind control programming wear off? Always more questions than answers. But we can throw another piece of evidence into the mix. So in the same way that in 1982, Prince seemed to know about an agenda that would be coming in 17 years into the future with the Millennium Bug PSYOP, he also seemed to have been clued in on the official narrative of 9/11, which was going to be presented to the general public in the year 2000, and the fact that it was going to be pinned on Osama bin Laden. I mean, he didn't do it, but the important point is that he was going to be blamed for it. So this is an audio recording from a concert that Prince performed in Utrecht in the Netherlands in December 1998. So this is a little less than 3 years before 9/11 would occur and be blamed on bin Laden. So he says, Osama bin Laden's getting ready to bomb, and is followed up by, America, you better watch out. 2001, hit me, in 1998. A warning, mockery. Going back to the Black Album, a lyric from one of the tracks on there goes, call People magazine, Rolling Stone, call your next of kin, because your ass is gone. He's got a 57 mag with the price tag still on the side, cousin, because when spooky say dead, you better say died. And what was the age at which Prince turned up dead? So we're told 57, right? So, way more questions than answers. And in summing up this entire presentation, of course, we've been to some dark and devastating places here. And I've quipped a couple of times along the way about how it's my job to piss people off and destroy their heroes and stuff, but on the serious side, it actually brings me no joy to be doing this. This job is a gift and a curse. It's a gift because it's great to have this knowledge, but it's a curse because when you come to these realizations, nothing is ever the same again. You can't look at your music idols in the same way again. Same goes for any kind of heroes in the public eye that we might have. Favourite actors, favourite sports stars, favourite DJs in my case, whatever it may be. But the positive to be drawn from all of this is that we find ourselves a very privileged generation in that we can now know this stuff in a way that previous generations were just not able to, because this information was not out there. It was very deeply hidden away within books and documents, and you had to know exactly where to go to find it. You had to spend days in libraries going through loads of old texts. Now we've got the internet, we've got the ability to share this kind of information quickly with anyone who will listen, and that process is well underway. It's become my full-time job. It was never the plan for it to be so, but I consider it my life's work and my rightful life path to be putting this information out there.
Well done, Mark.
Well, thank you. And I specialise in this, but this is just my own individual piece of the puzzle that I bring to the table. There's many subjects that I don't know a whole lot about. You know, I'm not great at medical knowledge, but that's okay because we have insiders and whistleblowers and medical professionals who know that subject inside out, and they can bring their piece of the puzzle to the table and share what they know. Then you have people that know a lot about geopolitics and finance and the money scam, how that all works, and personal sovereignty, as we were hearing about earlier, the birth certificate fraud, all of this, common law. You have experts in those fields. They can bring their pieces of the puzzle to the table. So between us, we're all bringing something. And when we assemble it, put all these pieces together, the big picture becomes apparent. And that process is now well underway. That's what's happening in a way that has just not been possible previously. And there's going to come a point where this information becomes unstoppable. You reach a point where it just can't be put back where it came from. The cat is not going back in the bag. The genie is out of the bottle, whichever metaphor you want to use. We're very close to that point now, if we've not crossed that point already. And it's only going to head in one direction. And eventually, all of these hidden truths, and all of this mind control, all of this propaganda, all of these professional, military-grade techniques of psychological manipulation that have been used against us, just ain't going to work anymore. Because the magician's tricks are going to be laid bare. So that brings me a lot of optimism and positivity for how things are going to pan out from this point going forward. If we can know all this already by this point, imagine how much further we're going to be a year down the line from now, 5 years down the line. You know, this whole process is only headed in one direction. And ultimately, it's a direction that the so-called elite, psychopathic, satanic control system don't want it to go in. It's their worst nightmare, and it's our best opportunity to take humanity, our collective future, to where we want it to be on our terms, instead of these sick bastards, for a change. Thanks for listening.